Welcome to our Adoption UK webinar this evening with Ben Douglas. Ben is very kindly spending his time to share his own personal story of his own adoption, and it's a topic that he's been very passionate about and campaigned tirelessly over, which is interracial adoption. It is a webinar, so we can't see or hear you. Don't worry about the chaos behind you, and it will be recorded and saved on our members resources area, so you can come back and see it at a later point should you wish. Ben's very happy to take questions, so I shall field them to him for the Q&A. They'll all be anonymised, so feel free to ask whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm really keen to get questions, actually, to sort of interact with all the members. And I'm
Our
really
members,
find out.
they're normally very good at questions, Ben, so I don't think that'll be a problem.
I can't promise I've got the answers, but I'll do my best.
That's fine. Okay, so I'll hand over to you then, Ben. Thank you so much.
Well, firstly, thank you all for joining the webinar. It's such an important subject, adoption, and of course interracial adoption, so I'm thrilled you've all decided to join in. Now, I originate from Barbados, and everyone thinks of Barbados as being this hot, sexy island, which is one part of it, but there's a church on every single street corner, literally. And so my mother met a guy who said he was going to marry her and all the rest of it. And then he passed away. So I was conceived out of wedlock, which number one was a huge scandal. And the family, her family around her, felt that, you know, she'd always be the black sheep of the family. They were very religious, that she'd let them down and all the rest of it. So she came over to the UK to be a nurse, knowing that, you know, she was going to be on her own and bring me up over here. While she was here, she was then diagnosed with breast cancer, which was quite aggressive. And I also think that there were elements of depression and various things going on there. So she thought the best thing to do would be to put me up for adoption. And the family in Barbados were very kind of much in agreement with that. So, you know, after lots of soul searching, you know, she sort of went forward and went through the process. And my mother, who's my adopted mother, who is my mother, actually wasn't necessarily looking to adopt. She was supporting a friend of hers who couldn't conceive and was sort of going around with her, you know, supporting the process and going to all the meetings while you know, her husband works and all the rest of it. So basically, my mother saw me when they had a sort of open day, which I don't think they kind of do now. And apparently she walked in and I was in a sort of little cot. And I looked up and put my arms up and smiled at her. And she went back to my dad and said, "Oh, how would you like to have another child? Because I've got an older brother and sister who are their biological children." And my dad said, "Great, are you pregnant?" And she said, "Well, not exactly." And it didn't occur to them that them being white and me being black would be any sort of problem. So they, you know, went through all the procedures and all the rest of it. And from day one, they got a barrage of, well, these were the kind of things that they were sort of put as barriers to adopting me. They wouldn't be able to do my hair. They wouldn't know what kind of food I would like to eat. And that there were so many cultural differences. Bearing in mind, I was just over 1 year of age. There's so many cultural differences that it would be damaging to me and they wouldn't be able to bring me up properly, which they just thought was ludicrous. Luckily, they had, you know, the financial wherewithal to be able to fight and to sort of, you know, really push through legally. And luckily, they were able to, you know, it was successful and they were able to adopt me, which I think has been a blessing in my life. Now, what they sort of found then in 1976, 1977, 1978, of this, you know, the cultural differences and the sort of the notion that black children should be with black parents, white children should be with white parents, and so forth, unfortunately hasn't changed a huge amount to now. And I'll sort of come back to that a bit later, but the whole Black Lives Matter, which is such an important cause, has also had an impact on interracial adoption. So when I was first adopted, there were challenges. So because I'd you know, had been my mother, then I'd been in foster care, then I had a foster mother who I sort of bonded with, and then I was adopted. I had terrible tantrums whenever my mother wanted to leave me. I would literally roll on the floor, grab her legs, wouldn't let her go, would be, you know, absolutely distraught. And they sort of worked through that. And, you know, with my sister, who was, you know, the next oldest to me, I was incredibly sort of clingy to her. And, you know, I would say to anyone, be aware that there will be these sort of challenges, as there would be with a birth child, just different things that, you know, crop up. But that was quite, especially in public, you know, if my mum just kind of dropped me off at nursery or something, and I would literally be on the floor, like, you know, someone had tried to murder me or something. And that sort of maybe took about 6 months, really, to sort of, for me to kind of completely sort of feel safe, secure, but, you know, from day one, and this is, I think, the key to adoption, my parents always told me that I was special and I was chosen. So I never felt a rejection, and that, you know, someone hadn't wanted me, they'd got rid of me because I was less than, or, you know, I wasn't worthy. I always felt that I was chosen and I was special. Now, possibly that's why I sort of went down the performing arts route and was sort of in the media, because I was the only black face in my nursery and my school. I grew up in the suburbs in a place called Teddington, which was lovely, but I literally was the only black face. So you either had to make that your kind of your superpower and sort of be larger than life and sort of confront all the sort of prejudices and casual racism, actually, which I got far more than, you know, overt, you know, people being really nasty. I'd have people saying, "Oh, what tribe are you from? You know, do you sort of still hunt with a spear?" When I'm 7, living in a house in Teddington. But that didn't kind of bother me, because I always felt, you know, I was special, and my parents, you know, really loved me. What always makes me laugh now is that people always do these cosmetic surgeries on their lips. And the one thing that was a bane of my life was having African lips. So if anyone was to have a go at me or give me, you know, a bit of a dig, they'd say, call me rubber lips, or make comments about it, you know, about my lips. So now when people say, well, you know, who does your lips? I'm black, they're natural. I always take it that they're kind of insulting me or making a little dig. So it's so funny how things go full circle. But at school, I didn't really, because my parents were white, I was black. I had a cross section of friends, because my parents made sure that I went to clubs and performance where, you know, I was sort of mixing with, you know, black people, you know, a whole range of people. And I genuinely, I don't think I saw colour and a difference in colour until really, maybe I was sort of 14, 15 and 16. And I really had an understanding of prejudice and oppression at a much higher level when I spoke to people who'd been beaten up and attacked simply because of the colour of their skin. And of course, they were very angry and very upset about that. So that was something that, you know, I had to learn later in life. But my parents very much were, they were about education, and they told me a lot about Black history, and, you know, I learned about that. What was also, in a way, challenging is that really, you know, I was much more creative and sporty. So role models I kind of had were sort of people like Bill Cosby, Oprah Winfrey, Eddie Murphy, and then obviously Lenny Henry. But there wasn't a cross-section of people that looks like me kind of out there. So that was something that, you know, my parents had to kind of work, you know, very, very hard. And that, you know, to feel that you had as much right to be in the room, you had as much right to aspire to achieve your goals and to, you know, go for it in whatever kind of capacity, you know, you wanted to sort of achieve your career. So that was something. But I think for me, because I always felt so secure and so loved and so safe with my parents, I never had a feeling, like I said earlier, of rejection. Now, other friends of mine who were interracially adopted have had kind of quite difficult situations, both with the parents not quite being able to handle the issues that, you know, are thrown up. For example, if they're getting sort of racial prejudice, or I mean, it used to make me laugh with my mother that if I was out with her, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, so your mum had an affair with a black man, did she?" And I said, "No, no, that's my mum." And they'd say, "Well, but you're black and she's white." And they couldn't kind of conceive the fact that, you know, a white woman would adopt a black baby. But I wouldn't kind of look at those people and think they're silly and stupid. That wouldn't sort of really get me down. Whereas I think if you're not given those kind of foundations and building blocks, then those insecurities and doubts and issues can really you know, creep in. And like I say, I used it as a sort of, you know, being the only sort of black face as a positive thing rather than sort of being a negative. But that, I think, was very much down to my parents, and that's something that I think is really sort of key. I think also my parents made an effort to sort of connect with as many parents who had adopted, so they had a bit of a support group, and they could talk about the challenges, the high points, the good points, the bad points, you know, everything that sort of they were going through, and they had other people that they could relate and bounce off as well. But I think really when, you know, in secondary school, and that's when people were far more interested, and sort of they could be quite sort of cruel and sort of say, oh, didn't your parents want you, or what happened to your birth mother, and all the rest of it. But again, like I said, I used to back those things off. But my story is slightly different to lots of people who are adopted, in as much as, although my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer, it actually turned out to be benign. She went back to Barbados. So literally on my 18th birthday, I had a letter from her saying, she'd love to meet me, because obviously, you know, once you're adopted, you can't legally be in touch with the parents or you know, the child you put up for adoption until they're of age, which is 18. So I thought, well, I'd love to meet her. And my parents were very supportive because they knew that they were my parents. And I remember going out to Barbados, and the most, you know, everyone asked me what it was like. And it was like seeing an old friend who you hadn't seen in maybe 20 years. And the most bizarre thing was, for the first time in my life, seeing somebody who had I had a physical resemblance to. So I just remember looking at her eyes and her mouth, and I had an uncle out there who is a spitting image of him. So that was just very, very bizarre. But because you know, to me, your mother is the person that's first there when you have a nightmare, when you first do well, you first fall over, that connection that I have with them. So my mummy Judy, who's my second mother, I have an affection for, of course. She's not my mother in the same way that my mum, who brought me up, is. And again, I know people that their parents, adopted parents, have felt very threatened by, you know, the birth mother or father, you know, coming back in, you know, into the scene. But I absolutely didn't, because I knew my parents were my parents. What was very difficult, actually, on that trip, I think a little bit, was lots of the relatives in Barbados were sort of very much basically saying, oh, well, you're the lucky one, you know, you've had this. But actually, it wasn't about finances. It was about having that secure, loving, nurturing home. And, you know, my adopted mum has been to stay with my birth parents and vice versa. And that was initially interesting, but then, you know, they get on. They're not best friends, but they have a relationship, and I have a relationship with her, and I'm very fond of going back to Barbados. And it was very interesting talking to her, because I kind of think, and maybe this is just how I've sort of processed it, what an amazing thing, what an act of love to be able to give up your child, because you know that you can give them you know, the life that they will have with you, A, if you're, you know, as she thought, terminally ill, or B, really being the black sheep of the family and sort of looked down upon in Barbados. I think what an act of love. So I don't take it, and I think it's nice for her that she feels that she's done, you know, the right thing. So yeah, that's slightly different, you know, to lots of other people I know who have been adopted. Now, what's very frustrating now is my experience on the whole. Of course, there was upsets and the, you know, the kind of emotions and things that one had to work through, but has been entirely positive. And I absolutely recommend it, and, you know, encourage anyone who's thinking about it to sort of go down that route. But what's so frustrating is the challenges my parents had in 1977, 78, 79 were literally ridiculous. You couldn't do his hair with food and all the rest of it, as I said earlier. Now, a lady contacted me who was fostering a lovely girl, I won't say her name, and had been fostering her for 3 years, and then decided she wanted to adopt her. And the social services came back to her and said, well, you can't. And she said, well, if I'm good enough to foster, why can't I go for adoption? And they said, well, she's black and you're white. So she anyway wrote to me, and because I've written various articles, I sort of took up the cause. and you know, she's not my sort of surrogate kind of goddaughter. We were able to make that happen, and she's so happy, the mother's so happy. But it frustrates me that the barrier seems to be simply about colour. And let's be honest, the reality is there are not enough Black and ethnic families coming forward to adopt. So therefore, you have a far higher percentage of Black and ethnic children in residential care. And to my mind, as great as those sort of children's homes and the care homes are, having a loving, stable family in a unit is by far the better option. And then, like I said, with Black Lives Matter, everything is slightly now being seen on sort of racial divides and racial lines. And the main thing they always throw in the face is culture. Now, I have a complete understanding of Africa, Barbados, and all the rest of it, but I'm also British, and I was brought here. So what is my culture? Is my culture Black? Well, if it's Black, what does that mean? Because, you know, a Black person from Zimbabwe, as opposed to a Black person from Rhodesia or where, you know, or Barbados or Jamaica, there are different cultural differences there. In fact, some, you know, tribes in Africa absolutely hate each other. So this is a question that I sort of really wrestle with. And also, you know, at the end of the day, love means love. And if someone is there and they're open to exposing and embracing and enhancing all sort of cultures and knowledge and giving the child a really rounded grounding of who they are, but also that they're not defined by the colour of their skin. And that's what I think is so frustrating. I think the least interesting thing about me is probably the colour of my skin. I'm very happy with it, but that's not the defining feature about me, and the thing that sort of should be portrayed about me, you know, and sort of put out there. And that's what I find so frustrating, that now we're going sort of slightly back, taking steps back. And, you know, I know the social workers do an amazing job, but very often they're reading from a book. And if you ask various social workers about their experience of adoption, they haven't adopted, they haven't been adopted. It's all sort of in a textbook. And they're telling me that my experience was wrong or bad in some way, because the sort of the textbook tells them that. And I keep coming back to it. If you're willing to love a child, and you're willing to support the child, and you're willing to, you know, really invest the time, and, you know, go through the good, the bad, and all the rest of it, what is the problem? Why is there this terrible barrier? And I've never felt not Black. I know I'm Black, but like I say, that's not the main thing. And the other thing, that I've got so many friends and people I know who've gone down the route with IVF, which is by no means a guarantee, as I'm sure you know, and they keep doing it and spending all this money. Then it doesn't work. So they think, actually, now we'll adopt. And then it's too late. They're too old. And I can't stress enough that my mother is my mother. And she has a no different love for me than she does for her birth children. And we're all different. I've got an older brother, a sister in the middle, and me. And we all have sort of different personalities. But the love and the connection we have is equal. I'm not spoiled. I'm not treated any worse. We're all the same. And I just think that if sort of social workers was to come and talk to more people like me and all the rest of it, I think that would then open their eyes a little bit more. And of course you have adoptions that go wrong, but of course you have terrible situations with birth children. And the thing is, it's about an open dialogue and not thinking that everything's going to be completely plain sailing. The minute you get the baby or the child, that everything's going to be wonderful. There will be challenges, but they're challenges in life across the board. So I think there's a question come up.
We do have some questions coming in now.
Okay, I'm ready.
So, how was your relationship with your siblings when you were initially adopted?
Well, my parents did a very good job. They made them very much part of the process. So it wasn't like, oh my God. I think, of course, because when I first came in, I was quite, you know, sort of bouncing off the walls a little bit. That was a kind of a bit of a shock to them. But then, particularly my sister, she was very sort of protective of me. I think slightly, you know, when she used to have friends over and I would endlessly want to be in with her and her friends, that was slightly annoying. But my parents very much made them part of the process. So yeah, so there was no, and I'm so close to them today. But one thing my parents didn't do, which I also know that other people have done, is they, you know, it was very much they chose me and they wanted to adopt me. They never made me feel grateful, or that I should kind of underlying be grateful, and, you know, and I've had friends who've been adopted who've had that, and that's a real difficult mental space to be in, because the minute you do anything wrong, that comes out, well, we adopted you. You know what I mean? And
very
that
damaging.
Very damaging. So so, you know, I've seen that a lot. But yeah, and a great relationship with them. But like I said, I wasn't spoilt as well. I was treated completely the same. So
I think we should get your parents on for a webinar, Ben. Sounds like
yes,
they've got all the hints and tips.
and also
I'm being serious.
you know, seriously, they'd love to do it. And the bizarre thing is, my mother and father weren't actively looking to adopt, but when they kind of got their head around it, they just couldn't understand why people were saying you couldn't do his hair as a reason not to adopt. So they thought, there's a child that needs love. What's the problem? But yeah.
We've got another member here. So we've got I'm white and 57 years old, and they've adopted an African 4-year-old little girl.
Yes.
Adopted her in South Africa, and she was abandoned at birth, so it will be difficult for them to represent her culture because they've got no idea of her cultural background. How will this affect her identity?
Listen, she's your daughter, and she's growing up in the UK, I'm assuming. So this is part of her culture. I would, you know, they used to, I can't think of the name, but there's an amazing African bookshop, which hopefully will be open again now, but you can get these books online. Really make sure that she has visual people that look like her, whether it be, you know, in a doll that's black, whether it be in books. That's the one thing that my parents did. So I kind of had a subliminal message that although in school I'm different, actually there are other people out there like me who are successful, funny, happy, whatever it might be. And I think you should look at, you know, particularly, you know, the region and where she's from. But if you started dressing her in tribal gear, I think that would be entirely disingenuous. I'm being slightly facetious, but you know what I mean? Have a nod to it and let her read these books and, you know, see films. Even, I know it sounds bonkers, but the multicultural and multiracial Disney, if she's into Disney, make sure it's not just a white blonde-haired princess she sees, but she sees, you know, diversity. And I think in that way, then you can work on the culture. And then as she gets older, you can kind of delve a bit more deeply. But you also don't want to sort of ram it down someone's throat who's living here in England speaking English and telling them somehow they're lacking because they're not sort of aping, you know, where they're originally from. So I think there's a balance. I think just putting it out there that there are people who look like you and it's okay, and they wore this and they ate that, and this is wonderful. You know, that it's everything is kind of on the same level and it's all acceptable. That's how I would.
And representation is so important, isn't it? And finally, very, very late to the party, people are making advancements in that, but it is so important to see books and TV and characters.
And dolls and action men and all those things. You know, when I was growing up, you didn't have that.
No.
And that's why I'm going slightly on a tangent. It was so heartbreaking with the whole thing with Bill Cosby, because for me, growing up, the Cosby Show and seeing a black family that was successful, and that was like something that you could latch onto, because all sports people, music, or, you know, Oprah, Bill, but not, and also in England there wasn't, of course, that many, you know, mainly American. But if you don't see that, then you always feel you're less than, I think. But then the flip side of that is that also your race is just one part of you, and that shouldn't be the defining thing. So that every time you're going somewhere, I'm black, I'm black, I'm black. Because that's a massive pressure on any young person as well. You just want to be you, who happens to be black, who happens to live wherever, and that's okay, and that's supported. But you don't want to also ram it down, you know, a child's throat, because it's overwhelming. You've got to let them be them with an understanding of, you know, and a nod to where they come from. But they're a unique mix now because they were born there, but they're living here now with you, and that's the person they're going to develop and be, but not to in any way sort of try and pretend or disconnect from, you know, the roots they've come from. But that was another thing that, and I'm slightly generalizing now, that was a feeling in Barbados within my family, so I'm not condemning anyone else, but that if you adopted a child, you could end up with the devil's child, that somehow for the reason the child was up for adoption, it was cursed. And I think there's a slight sort of hangover of that with certain areas in the Black community, and that's why they don't come forward to adopt, because the numbers don't stack up. And I think there's sometimes socio-economic, but the government sort of makes it as well, not always as easy as possible, but there's financial support and all the rest of it. So that frustrates me that not enough ethnic families are coming forward. So therefore, like I say, more Black and ethnic children are in residential care, and that's just a fact. And that, again, slightly go off on a tangent, when Madonna was condemned, for example, for adopting 2 children, 3 maybe, from Malawi, who were in a children's home. It's not that she went there, I'll pick you out because you look cute because you're Black. And she put a lot of money into the country, and she takes them back, many times. Yes, I know that's a celebrity, but that the kind of the narrative of that was, oh, this rich white woman going in and picking up, poor Black babies. But had she not done that, they would probably still be in a children's home now. So there are other dimensions with her being famous. Yeah. But in terms of the sort of boiling it down, if she is genuinely a great mum and a great parent, it shouldn't matter. And it shouldn't matter a Black family adopting a white child from Finland or wherever. Do you know what I mean? But that sort of rarely happens as well. I just think that now, and this is the problem again, it's great representation, it's great Black Lives Matter, it's great all these steps we're making forward, but don't let colour be the defining thing about us all, because then actually we're taking 10 steps back. And that's very much my feeling.
So how would you compare the challenges you had growing up to your siblings? Would you say they were the same? I guess you mentioned the racism you experienced at secondary school, so I guess they didn't have that to contend with.
No, I would say, although my sister had sexism, because she sort of developed, and she, sort of did modelling when she was younger for a bit, and she had a very defined look. So I remember sort of people, and certainly guys, not really understanding what sexism was, but sort of being aware that they sort of objectified her and all the rest of it. Now that's slightly different to literally someone calling you the minute you have an argument rubber lips. So that it's always bubbling under the surface somewhere, that's something they can throw at you. But I was lucky, I suppose, also because I'd seen by that point Roots and all of those sort of type of shows. I really understood that those people were stupid, and yes, it was racist, but in a way, I wasn't being lynched, I wasn't being tarred and feathers, which did happen to a lot of other people. I know it sounds a strange thing to say, but I just thought these are stupid, ignorant people, because it is racism. But on the scale of things, there's so much more horrific things that go on to people out there. And I think it sort of fueled me to kind of be successful. I suppose that's one thing I think that maybe has sort of come from adoption, that subconsciously I've always worked and had to achieve, because I've sort of felt maybe I've had this opportunity. And the worst thing my parents could ever say to me was, I'm disappointed in you. And I would probably take that on board more than my siblings would. So of course I think there's an element of wanting to sort of please and wanting to kind of achieve. So I think that has come from being adopted. But in terms of the challenges, I think because I was very much sort of performing arts and then sort of moved into the media, that was an advantage, being different, standing out, being a little bit. And so I've got the attitude now, take me or leave me. I wouldn't offend anyone, but if you don't mind me, that's your problem. You know what I mean? Whereas I suppose you stop being a people pleaser. Whereas lots of people, friends of mine who are adopted, are sort of paralysed with that. And then you see relationships they have and you think, no, this is not great, because you're just putting someone on a pedestal, and your sort of validation comes from them. And if they're displeased with you, that crushes you. Whereas I didn't have that. It is complicated, but I think bringing up any child can be complicated. And it's about having an open dialogue. So my parents were very much open with me, so that when I was growing up, they'd sort of say things like, well, if you are going to smoke, come and it took the excitement out of it. Well, if you are going to have sex, so it just made all the sort of naughty things, which I thought I'm going to be really they sort of took the sting out.
Yeah.
And it's so strange because they are very patient people. And I think I always knew with them as well that what they said, they meant. And I think that is so important. Even on a little thing, on tomorrow we're going to go to the park. We went to the park. So that because of that sort of trauma, and let's be honest, it is a trauma, initial trauma in my life, I was sort of very kind of distrustful of people. So my parents were very sure that everything they said they stuck to. So that structure and those foundations were built. And like I said, I've got friends again who didn't have that. So they always had the sort of butterflies in their stomach that things aren't quite, as they should be. But yes, but there are challenges. There are challenges. I don't think adopting is for someone who just wants a completely easy ride. But then I wouldn't think any child would just be. There wouldn't be any sort of ups and downs with it, really.
Yes, exactly. We've got a comment. This is really good. Thank you, Ben. Another member, when they adopted their daughter, the birth mother stipulated that she only wanted a mixed race couple or a single white mother. Did your birth mother have any say in the race of your adoptive parents?
Unfortunately for my birth mother, no. I think she was in such turmoil. She was diagnosed with the cancer. Like I say, I think then depression kicked in. And I think she told me it became a mission for her to think she's going to give me the best start in life. However, I don't think she realised that the minute I was sort of put up for adoption, she was out of the picture. I think she thought she might be vetting the parents and seeing, were they religious, were they this? She could fill in a form, but she wasn't going to be meeting them at all. For obvious reasons, data protection, there's a distance is put in place. But no, I think she, a loving home, and I think Christian, but my parents aren't Christian, so I don't think the social studies went with that. But just to give
the loving home bit right.
Loving home, yeah.
Lovely. This person can totally relate to your points about the importance of having a loving family unit. They're adopted from India and no way of tracing their biological mother and father, but their mom and dad are white. Love is love and family is family. And it's so nice to hear you say, because it's as an adoptive parent, you often hear, "Oh, what about their real mom?" or "What do their real?" And it's
their real mum.
I know, and I think it's really important to get that across. That, as you said, the real parents are the ones who deal with the nightmares and the cut and knees. And
I can genuinely, from my hand and my heart, say it because I've got my adoptive mum, who is my mum, and I'm back in touch with my birth mother, who I have a bond with and a connection, but it's not the deep love I have for my mother, who has been there pretty much. I don't really remember before I was 2. Lots of it I've been told and all the rest of it. But from the age of 2, I had this love and the loving parents and loving family. So that is I'm not comparing, but that's my mother, and that's where my heart is. So
that's lovely, yeah. Just a tip from one member that Woke Babies is a good resource. I'll have to look at that if anybody's interested. Woke Babies. Okay, this member, their 7-year-old was victim to racist comments at school, which they dealt with at the time, but she became very politically interested in the Black Lives Matter movement. She sometimes gets very emotional about things that happen to other Black people.
Yeah.
She doesn't necessarily think they'll happen to her, but she finds it more sad that things are happening to people like her. They don't want to tell her too much truth or hide too much from her. Any advice on striking the right balance? That's so tricky.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's a funny thing, because when I was growing up, if I saw a film and a Black person was killed, I'd have a slight pang because, of course, you feel sort of a connection. And you think, well, that's the only Black person in the film. Now they've been killed. You know what I mean? There'd be that sort of subtext. But going back to what I said earlier, and I know this is very difficult to say or to maybe grasp, but there are stupid people in the world. Really stupid, ignorant people.
Oh, I think we've lost you, Ben.
Oh, can you hear me?
I think we have frozen.
Oh, hello? I can see you.
Okay, we're back.
We're back. Sorry about that.
Hallelujah.
What I was saying was there are really stupid, ignorant people in the world. And if the best they can come up with is a physical attribute that you have, simply the colour of your skin, then they're not that bright. Now, I know in the kind of when you're in the eye of the storm, what people are saying, the M word or whatever to you, which is horrendous and horrible, but they are stupid people. And I think that, you know, often people that try to sort of bully me or whatever at school, when you then find out what they've had to endure in their life, you know, one person I used to sort of clash with a bit, you find out the alcoholic parent, all the rest of it. When you're older, you can look back and think, well, I can completely see why you're so angry and such a nasty person. When you're a child, of course, you don't have that sort of capacity. But I think it's their stupidity. There's always been, since the beginning of time, racism. It's on a scale. I also think that, of course, there's racism here, and what happened in America recently is absolutely diabolical. And thank God the world stood up and saw that. But also, it's different in America to here, so that you know, America, I think, is very ghettoized. So you have a rich black area, a middle class black area, a poor black area, a rich white area, but it's really not as integrated as London is. But then, of course, when you see the Stephen Lawrence thing and all the rest of it, which took so long, which is absolutely outrageous. But I think, knowing that they're stupid, don't let their poison negativity infect you, and almost feel sorry for them, because if you're that pathetic, that's all you can say to someone. You're not worth your daughter's time. And I think, give an overview of slavery, but it can be overwhelming. I mean, if you watch 12 Years a Slave, it's like sort of running a marathon. It is, and depending on the age, I think you can sort of address things without really going to that really dark place. And also to focus on things that she can do, whether it's sponsoring a child in Africa, whatever it could be, there's a positive step. And something she can engage with that is actually doing something to help someone else that is positive. So it's not just focusing on let's be honest, the minority of really nasty people out there, and they're stupid. So that's how I would look at it. But that is very difficult, because at the end of the day, that's the one thing, if you're black, that's the colour of your skin that everyone can identify. It's not, same as if you're necessarily Jewish or a Muslim or whatever. You're black, you look different, so people can instantly see it. But also the other thing is, don't see racism everywhere where it's not. Sometimes someone can just be a rude person having a bad day, and they don't smile at you when you walk into a shop. Don't get into the mindset of, oh, that's because I'm black, because that is a very damaging way to live, because then that makes you paranoid, distrustful of people, then you sort of project a different energy out there. So don't look for racism where it's not, because I think you'll know when you're confronted by it, but don't let it take up your headspace, because these people are stupid.
Thank you. It's difficult now because, the media, social media amplifies this hate so much, doesn't it? Yeah. And it really does come into your own home. So I guess this sort of generation feel it so much deeper.
Don't get into a debate, block them. Not that you should have to. And this is another thing that I think, when it comes to sort of a hate crime, if you can't say something verbally to someone, you shouldn't be able to type it to them on Instagram or something. I think that's something for the government to look at. I think it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Or websites, for people to learn how to be anorexic. I mean, that should not be allowed out there. But anyway, I'm digressing, sorry.
Yes, no, got a member here, they love your positivity. They're an adoptive white mom to a daughter who is white, Black Caribbean. She's only a toddler and has got lots of dolls, films that look like her. Yes. But she will often say she wishes her skin was like hers, her mother's, or her hair was like it. Any ideas on managing this?
I would say, but I wish my skin was like yours. Look at your beautiful skin. Look at your beautiful hair. Because she's looking at her mother as her world, and of course wants to be like her. And yes, that was the one thing, like I say, I hadn't realised what I'd missed out on, but having someone I physically look like. I'd never had that in my life. Never really thought about it until at the age of 18. I went back to Barbados and I thought, oh, this is quite. But make a fuss of her, how gorgeous she looks, how pretty she looks, because of course, yes, as we're saying, she is in a white world, and the majority of images of beauty of is getting better with diversity, but the majority of images are a white, certain size, certain look, and that's seen as the sort of the perception of beauty. So really letting her know how stunning and wonderful she is, because you don't want her to further down the line to sell herself short for feeling sort of insecure and less than. And I just think keep positive praise. And then if she says, well, I want skin like you, and say, well, why, you've got such beautiful skin, look at, you know, make a fuss of it rather than, but keep it light when they're younger, I think.
Okay, lovely, thank you. What are the core things you needed growing up that has made you the person you are today?
Do you know, I think one thing, being told that I was chosen and therefore that I was special, so that through all the storms and ups and downs in my life and challenges and the racial things I had sometimes, it didn't devastate me, because I felt that my parents had chosen me. So people sometimes, you know, really wanted to get nasty, oh, you were adopted, your parents didn't want you, but I said, but my parents chose me. You know, so that I think is very important, to let the, you know, your child, who is your child, know that you chose them, you picked them, you really wanted them, that they're special, rather than they've been rejected from something. And I think that's what's given me the positive outlook, really. If I can pinpoint down to one thing, that kind of gives you an armour, really, I think.
So important, yeah. We've got a tip for that member who was talking about wishing the skin and hair was like their moms. So there's a book by Rochelle Humes called The Magic Hair Swap.
Perfect.
They had the same issues and they found that brilliant. So The Magic Hair Swap by Rochelle Humes might be an idea for your little girl. Sounds like it's age appropriate for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, growing up in a white family, how did they handle the conversation of racism and things like how to look after your hair and skin? They are white and their partner and have started the process, would like to adopt a child who is black.
The first thing my mum did was she found a black hairdresser. She thought, right, I can go and read books and all the rest of it. But actually, and that was another black person who I could look up to. He was great. He was funny, charming. So I think to have as many influences, both as role models, you know, who are sort of on TV or whatever, but also who are physically in your life. So I started going to have haircuts when I was 3 or 4 and stayed with this guy for years. And he sort of taught my mother, but you know, how to sort of put all the creams and everything in. But it was great having him do it, because he had the same hair as me. So rather than sort of my mother going through that, he would, was a great person. He would talk all about the, you know, his experience in the Caribbean and all the rest of it, but really taught me how to do my hair from someone who had sort of similar hair. And that's something I think, as many positive role models that you can sort of interact with, then I think that's, you know, very positive. But really doing my hair,
I know, a drop in the ocean. Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's like, you know.
Let's try bringing up the child. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean. So
we've got another tip from one of our members. At Hey Bambino on Instagram offers teaching courses in hair, and they've found it a godsend. So that's very useful as well.
Yeah.
And that's all the questions we've got so far. I've already said that I will send out those slides.
Yes.
That you sent, because they're really beautiful photos and they're really evocative, and they make sort of take you back to the times, because they were different times.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, they really were.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose sort of the kind of racism that I then subsequently had was, I'd speak to someone on the phone, and then I'd go to a meeting or something, and they say, "Oh, I didn't think you'd be black." And I'd always say, "Well, what does a black person sound like?" There's not just one voice or one look or one image of a black person, and that is something that, for example, in the TV show Idris Elba was in, and the lady complained that he wasn't eating Jamaican food when he plays the policeman. I can't think what it's called, but Luther. No, is it Luther? Yeah.
It was Luther.
Yeah, and then she said, well, he's not eating Jamaican food, so therefore he's not a, you know, good role model. And I just thought, oh. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, can white people not eat Indian food? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just, you know, so we've got to be careful not going back to these ridiculous stereotypes. Anyway, but yeah, and I wish anyone who's out there in the process of adopting, who has adopted, all the luck in the world and all the joy of that wonderful family which you're going to have. So
it's so lovely, like I said, to hear a story so positive and uplifting as yours, Ben. And thank you so much for sharing your journey, because it is personal. To sort of, you know, stand up here and sort of open your heart and your family. And we've got some lovely comments. This has been really amazing. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing. And we've had a lot of people on tonight that, you know, really needed to hear what you had to say. Thank you very much for sharing your story. So yeah, massively appreciate your time and your advocacy as well, because it's not just about turning up for an hour webinar. You know, you have got a big track record of it. So
yeah, marvelous.
Thank you so much. Excuse me?
Are you whizzing off straight afterwards?
No. We can stick around.
Say goodbye to all the lovely people.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us this evening and your really, really interesting questions. This will be on the members area, so that from tomorrow, so that you can come back and rewatch it with your family, just to dig a bit deeper with some of the issues. And again, such lovely comments coming in, Ben. Thank you. You're amazing. You've really given a positive insight into adoption. Thank you for your honesty. So yeah, thank you, guys.